When we think of immigration in America, we usually think of Mexican immigration. With Mexican immigrants comes with Mexican culture, which is pretty much everywhere in the US, especially in California. Although there have been Mexican immigrants since the Spanish colonial era, Spanish wasn't always the dominant secondary language that it is today, as there was a time when German was the dominant language, from the 19th to early 20th century. That all changed when America joined World War I. It's important to note that the term white American was vastly different 100 years ago, as white American is only reserved to people of Anglo-Saxon descent, as during this time, the largest immigrant groups were Polish, Italian, Irish, and most notably German, which will be the main focus of the video. The history of German immigration to the US began in 1608, a year after the founding of Jamestown. It wasn't long until the first German communities were founded in Germantown, Pennsylvania. Fast forward to the German Revolution of 1848-49, many Germans sailed to the US in search of opportunity. By 1860, about 1.3 million German-born immigrants resided in the US, with 200 German-language publications. Even after the unification of Germany in 1871, German immigration still continued in large numbers. Unlike most immigrant groups who assimilated into the American mainstream, German migrants retained their names, language, and culture. This helped the fact that many Germans opened up schools, clubs, businesses, as well as churches in the German language, the most out of any immigrant group. In some cities, students were given the option to enroll their kids in German-speaking schools. The 1880s saw the largest number of German migrants arriving in America, numbering nearly 1.5 million, with 250,000 in 1882 alone. By the end of the 19th century, about 800 German-language newspapers were published in the US. By 1910, Germans were among the largest immigrant groups in America, numbering at 9 million first and second generation Germans. By this time, many Germans began to assimilate to American society, but they still maintained their culture, as well as being highly respected, despite not being considered as American at the time. That all changed with the outbreak of World War I. When the news reached US shores, reactions vary among German Americans. Although they had deep connections with the fatherland, they were not politically aligned with the German Empire, but they did express support for the German war effort, with some coming back to Germany to fight for the fatherland. It wasn't until reports of the rape of Belgium when anti-German sentiment began to form. The sinking of the Lusitania and the Black Tom explosion further worsened relations between the US and Germany. Although German Foreign Office tried to combat it by launching pro-German newspapers in the United States, it wasn't enough to sway public opinion from joining the war against Germany. During this time, patriotic societies such as the National Security League and the American Defense Society began to form, which anticipated for an eventual war with Germany, as well as advocating for the statewide assimilation among US citizens. With politicians now questioning the loyalty among German civilians in the US, it seems that things are going to get worse for the German Americans. Their fate was finally sealed with the reintroduction of unrestricted submarine warfare and the subsequent US entry in the war. With German Americans now seen as illegal aliens, they were heavily monitored by the government for suspected spies. The Enemy and Sedition Act of 1917 and 18 restricted trade and movement among US citizens. Germans by contrast were affected the most, as they are already classified as illegal aliens. Lynchings and vigilante actions also occurred, with Robert Prager being a notable example. By far the greatest blow to German Americans was the statewide erasure of German culture and identity. German schools, churches, clubs, and language services have to shut down or be Americanized to stay afloat. Not to mention that German names and food has to be changed as well. Names like Schmidt were changed to Smith, and food of German origin such as the sauerkraut and hamburger, which is still in its infancy by the way, has to be changed to Liberty Cabbage and Liberty Sandwich, though those names will not stick. With German Americans facing hostility on all sides, the only way to prove their loyalty is to contribute to the war effort. Despite facing prejudice among Americans, as well as other immigrant groups, they still fought valiantly. The most notable German American, who was also the most accomplished Ww1 American pilot, was Eddie Rickenbacker, with a confirmed kill count of 26 aircraft. World War I and its immediate aftermath led to a sharp decline of the German language, identity, and culture in America. Although assimilation did happen prior to the war, it accelerated by statewide assimilation campaigns during the war, which is so effective that Germans who arrived in America after the war hide their identity to prevent any further harassment. With the rise of National Socialism and the subsequent events that led to World War II and the Holocaust, the prospects of bringing back German culture in America is no longer a possibility. In its heyday, the German language was the second most spoken language in America, with German being almost on par with English in terms of importance. This is thanks to German migrants managing to retain their heritage, but anti-German sentiment during World War I single-handedly destroyed German culture in America. This is not unique among German Americans, as during World War II, many Japanese Americans faced a similar situation. But unlike German culture, which disappeared after the war, Japanese culture not only grew in large numbers, thanks to, well, you know, but was highly respected today by all sides of the political spectrum. In conclusion, although German culture had all but disappeared in America, some elements did survive, most notable being the hamburger. Not to mention that Germans or people of German descent made up the largest number of white Americans, with Mexicans now being the largest immigrant group, and Spanish the second most spoken language in America. Who knows what American culture will look like in the next 50 years. It's possible that Spanish might be the dominant language in America, or Chinese, depending who's in charge.
What did I tell you not to look up Hitalia, Indonesia?